Good afternoon. This is David Abrahams, Head of Legal at the ISM. Welcome to all our attendees for today's webinar, an introduction to the ISM self-publishing pack, which we are launching today. Just a few words about the format for today. I have a presentation that we're going to go through, but we aim to leave plenty of time for questions at the end of the presentation, and you'll see that there's a column on your left in which you can type in any questions you have for us. I won't stop the presentation to as we're going through the presentation to answer questions. We'll deal with all those questions towards the end. I hope we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes for questions at the end. I'm also delighted to say, as you can see from the slide, that it's not just me present today. I'm also joined by Professor Steve Goss from the University of Surrey, who is a professor of composition and knows a great deal about publishing and self-publishing. Steve, do you want to say a few words?
Sure. I mean, first thing I have to say is I'm not self-published myself, but I do know a lot of people who are, and I've watched various people sort of start their careers in this way, and then some who've been published by a publisher later decide they want to go self-published. So I've probably seen the self-publishing thing from all angles.
Great, thank you, Steve. I think we're now ready to make a start on the presentation. So just an overview of the topics we're going to be covering today. First of all, why have a self-publishing pack at all? What's the thinking behind this new initiative? Then a section on what music publishers actually do, which obviously you need to think about if you're going to take on, in effect, the role of a publisher for yourself. Then we're going to be discussing why you might want to consider self-publishing. And then in the fourth section of the presentation, we'll be giving you some practical tips about some of the nitty-gritty, the practicalities that self-published composers have to think about. Finally, a short section on how the ISM can help. As I've said, we're aiming to have 15 to 20 minutes for questions at the end of the session. So why have a self-publishing pack? Well, there are, this is an increasing trend amongst composers at the moment. I think there are three main drivers for composers considering self-publishing. First of all is that it can be challenging for composers to secure a publishing deal from an established music publisher. And if you go down the self-publishing route, you don't have to worry about that. The second issue is that many composers really value the flexibility and the independence that self-publishing brings. They really are able to drive the promotion of their music themselves without having to deal with a publisher and sort of work to their priorities. And some composers prefer that flexibility and independence. And finally, and a key issue, of course, the financial consideration. If you self-publish, you don't have to share your profit with your publishers. Whereas if you've got a publishing deal, you're going to be giving a percentage that can vary enormously, anything from 30 to 80% of your income you might have to share with a publisher. Steve, I wanted to bring you in here. Why do you think it is that so many composers are considering self-publishing these days?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. One is that through communications, mass communications through the internet, through social networking, it's quite a lot easier than it used to be to get your kind of message out there. And I think one trend that is really interesting is the way in which composers who have been published are now becoming self-published. In many ways, one of the most important things for any composer is building up a network of contacts, performers who play their music, so they build performances and so on. And if that network's already in place, then it gives you a good platform from which to become self-published and to distribute your works and so on. And now people can make PDFs available online. They can print stuff at home relatively cheaply. So it is a viable option in a way that maybe in the past it wasn't.
And we were speaking earlier, and you said that some composers who have been published actually are making a decision to move into self-publishing. Do you want to say a bit about
absolutely.
that?
I mean, there's, I think a lot of people who don't have publishing deals imagine that publishers are these wonderful things who just do everything for you and you just sit back and do nothing. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's very hard for these publishers to make any money at all. It's a very competitive market and there aren't that many sales to be had. So it's not as if it's a company with people sitting around with lots of time to do, wondering how they can promote your work. And to some extent, I think sometimes composers get a little frustrated that they want a bit more autonomy and a bit more control over the things that are happening. And especially when they get to the point where they're finding that many of their commissions are coming from their own contacts rather from the publisher setting things up and so on. Sometimes it can take a long time for a publisher to get a score out, whereas if you're self-published, you can do it, it's up to you what speed that happens. But there are an increasing number of people who've moved away from a publishing house to becoming self-published.
Thank you for that. So just moving on, again, why are we producing a self-publishing pack now? This is an initiative that came from ISM composer members. It's an area where we think there really is a strong interest amongst composers and a need for advice and guidance, and we hope the pack is a useful contribution to that. I'm glad to say that our composer members have been closely involved in the development of the pack. And this is all part of our Make Music Work advice series. We had a big conference called Make Music Work that took place last year. This is part of a series of advice packs that we're producing, aimed at equipping musicians to pursue successful careers in music in the current environment. Where can you find the self-publishing pack? Well, we're launching it today. You don't have to be an ISM member to download the pack. You can just follow the link on our website. We've got the address up there on the slide, www.ism.org/self-publishing pack. And also ISM members can, of course, access the pack from the members area of our website. So it's definitely aimed at ISM members and non-members. That sort of finishes introducing the pack. I now want to move on to the issue about what music publishers actually do. We'll come on to the extent that they can fulfill all these roles. I think Steve will have a few words to say about that. So perhaps I should say this is the ideal world. Your perfect music publisher would be performing a whole list of different roles, and the key ones are obviously selling or hiring music in physical and digital formats. And that's kind of self-explanatory. But really, publishers have a good publisher does far more than just sell music. They also should be marketing and promoting their music to performers. They should be registering works with PRS for music. They should be seeking commissions and negotiating commissioning fees for their composers. So really working in partnership with composers to build their career. And number 5 on the list, developing those relationships, those crucial relationships between composers and other industry professionals, whether that's performers, ensembles, people in the TV and film industry, advertising, games industry, all sorts of potential income streams for composers. But obviously a good publisher will be trying to get music out there to the marketplace where it can make money for composer and publisher. And then finally, all the administrative services, writing biographies, arranging travel and accommodation, sending out invoices. So those are the kind of things an ideal music publisher might provide. But Steve, to what extent do you think music publishers are able to fulfill all those roles? Or is it a case that some music publishers are good at some of those roles and some of them are less good? What would you say?
Well, I mean, it's not as if all publishers do the same thing. There are some very well-known ones who look after their composers extremely well. There are some other publishing companies who, will produce scores but do little else. Also, I think it's important to note that within every publishing company, they have a kind of pecking order of composers, and they'll certainly do more for the people that they consider to be their stars than the people who they don't consider to be their stars. So I think what people get from the same publisher often is quite different, and the amount of work that they put in. In a way, I mean, one of the sort of advantages of having a publisher is it's some kind of third-party endorsement of your work. By saying, oh, you're published by this publishing house, you must be good. You're recorded by this record company, you must be good. But I think we're in a stage now where that sort of idea is kind of breaking down a little bit. And there are plenty of composers who have very successful careers who are self-published. And I think, in a sense, it's different for every individual. You've got to sit down and think to yourself, well, what will this publishing deal bring to me if I take one on? And would I be better off self-published? I have many friends who are self-published, and they swear by it. It requires an enormous amount of work and organisation. It's not something you can necessarily fit in the cracks of your working week. It does take up a considerable amount of time. And it's largely, down to the kind of your level of personal organisation and professionalism. And the success, I think like in many businesses, is very little to do with the actual product music itself, much, much more to do with how well the business is run as a business. And I think that, that's an important aspect to music publishing.
Great, that's really helpful, Steve, and that leads us very well on to the next section of our presentation. Why might you consider self-publishing? Well, Steve has covered some of these points already, but clearly the main advantages are not having to worry about getting a publishing deal, your complete independence and flexibility, and the fact that you don't have to share your profits with the publishers. So the benefits, in a way, are quite straightforward. But then you also have to consider the challenges that successful self-publishing will bring. You need to have either a wide range of skills or be able to access those skills from elsewhere. So we've already touched on some of these. You've got to be someone who's good at selling, distributing, editing your manuscripts, and producing them to high quality, and we're going to say more about that later on. Be a bit of a manager, have access to legal advice, accountancy advice, PR, marketing, collecting money, invoicing, administration, proofreading and printing. There's a whole range of skills which you really need to be on top of to be a really successful self-publisher. So whilst there are huge advantages for the people for whom it works well, you shouldn't underestimate some of the challenges that you might face. I also want to mention in this section on the advantages of self-publishing, the importance of being aware of the income streams. This is what a good publisher would be doing for you, and if you're self-publishing, you've got to be really savvy about all these potential income streams. Clearly the physical or digital sale of sheet music is just one tiny part of the process of being a composer and trying to make money from composition. You've got rental of scores to artists and ensembles for performances, royalties from live performances and broadcasts. The more live performances you can secure, the better. Income from recording deals and income from synchronization licenses, the use of your music in film and television. That's something that can be really, really lucrative, but you've got to be a really effective networker to get your music into those kind of avenues, to get those opportunities. And we talked about some of the key skills that those challenges will throw up for self-published composers. Clearly good time management. You've got to be really effective at doing all these tasks on top of producing good quality, original, attractive music. Your editing and your proofreading, design of how you're going to present your scores, competitive pricing, the physical production, producing a good product, and then all the promoting, the networking and marketing. So there is a lot to take on here if you're going to do it successfully. And you certainly need to think carefully at the outset as to how you're going to address all these various tasks that a successful self-published composer is going to have to tackle. So now we're going to move on to some of the practical tips for dealing with some of the challenges that we've just flagged up in the previous section. And I want to talk first about producing scores. Most composers are going to use publishing software, the most familiar Sibelius or Finale, to produce digital scores. And if you're not confident with that publishing software, you're going to have to consider engaging a copyist or editor to assist with this. So you've got a good quality digital score to work with. But then you've got to think about printing. We suggest at least considering investing in a laser printer, preferably one that can print A3 or A2 size paper, so you can print landscape scores, which may well be what your customers are after. Investing in good quality paper stock is really important. And another consideration is whether it's worth investing in a binding machine. These cost between £200 and £350, but you can also use your local stationery firm. So again, you're going to have to take a view on what is most cost effective for you. But if you're producing physical scores, it's really, really important to get the quality right. And Steve, I think you wanted to chip in at this point on some of the issues you need to consider.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few things here to really think about. First of all, any composer is only going to make a fraction of their income from selling printed music. The main thing is to get it distributed as widely as possible so more people perform it, which is much more likely to bring you proper income. Performances and recordings bring in the vast majority of the composer's income. So there's one consideration, which would be that you just simply put up all your PDFs on your website for free. This saves an enormous amount of time and effort. And actually, the amount of profit you make from selling them is very small compared with the number of hours it takes you in order to set everything up, particularly if you're going to produce actual hard copies. Because, modern printing is very high level, very professional. You'd need a sort of very high grade printer. You've already mentioned one. Those don't come cheaply. But binding has to look professional too, with proper folding, proper cutting, proper stapling in the right place. And anything that looks a bit sort of shoddy or homemade is going to give a worse impression than not having a hard copy at all. So I think if you're going to go into producing your own scores, then the quality is really, really important. It's not so difficult to get this right. One thing you can do is ask a printer that you know. And some self-publishers actually give all their PDFs to printers to do everything for them because they know a printer will do a particular job. They'll do a particular price for multiple orders and so on. And sometimes that's a better way to go because the quality control is taken out of your hands. But what's crucial in terms of the notation itself is that there are, the notation has to be unbelievably well edited. I mean, the amount of editing that's done by professional publishing houses is extraordinary. Proofreading, how exactly to notate everything. If you don't have Elaine Gould's book already, Behind Bars, that's a very important book for anyone writing classical concert music, just to get the kind of standard way of doing things. Programs like Sibelius and Finale are designed for ease of use and convenience, not necessarily for professional publishing. And there are many things you have to do as an editor to transform the score from a kind of standard Sibelius or Finale score into something else publishable quality. I mean, Elaine Gould's book goes into that in detail. But I think one of the things that a publisher can bring is this kind of level of professional quality, which if you're going to self-publish, you can do yourself. And if you are going to do that, then you need to invest a lot of time and effort into it. One thing to bear in mind, that it often takes as long to edit a score and typeset it than it does to write a piece in the first place. So the more time you put into it, the more kind of useful that score is going to be. Even many scores from publishing houses have mistakes in them. And some of the self-published things I've seen have been shockingly bad. And they give a very, very bad impression. So this is one area where I think the self-publisher really needs to spend a lot of time and effort getting this exactly right. One thing I often suggest to my students is go to a very high-level publisher, a score, I can name them, I suppose, Faber, Schott, and so on, and just look at exactly how these things are laid out, exactly how they express things, how big things are, how much space there is on a page. There's a whole art to it. Which, if you're a composer, you don't really think about much. You just get notation down enough for people to read and to move on. But if you're going to go into self-publishing, this is a really important area. And it will make people think your music is worth looking at. If it looks great, they'll give it a second look. I mean, I've spent many years looking through compositions in competitions. And sometimes, they say, here's 150 quid to judge this competition, and then the doorbell goes, you've got 150 scores to look through, to whittle them down. And so literally you're just opening, and first impressions are everything. And if it gets past the first impression test, then you've got a chance. And I think it's the same with self-publishing. If the score looks serious, and you've got samples of your scores on a website somewhere, and you think, oh, this looks good, that will get people interested.
Great, really helpful advice there from Steve. The next topic I want to consider was online distribution. Obviously, in terms of cost, it's much, much cheaper, as Steve has mentioned, to distribute your music online rather than producing a physical product. And you can distribute digital scores by email or using e-commerce platforms such as PayPal. You can distribute on your website, and that reduces your production costs. But I think the point Steve was making is don't regard the fact that you might prefer to distribute online. Don't see that as meaning you can take a shortcut in terms of how your scores look on the page, because whether it's a physical product or whether you're sending someone a PDF, the issues are making it look as professional as possible, making it look as good as the kind of score you would get from a high quality publishing house is just as important, presumably.
Absolutely it is. I mean, I think that's, again, something which people should consider very carefully, is that often people will get a first impression about your work from looking at the first page of thing they see on a website. So they may hear a piece in a concert, or they may hear about you in some other way. So they'll go to your website, they'll click on something and look at a sample score. And those first 5 to 10 seconds can make an enormous difference. You know, if you can draw people in and they think, well, this looks interesting, or looks fun. And again, it's very important to decide what you're going to put up there that people will see without having to invest or without having to go any further. But I come back to this idea that actually, you know, no one is ever going to make a lot of money selling music, the actual printed copies. And actually putting your stuff up for free makes things a lot easier, and you don't lose money that way.
And this links to the final point on this slide. An attractive website that makes your music available easily to the public is essential. And as Steve said, you may take the view, although it's entirely a matter for you, you may take the view that it's better to get your music out there by making a PDF of the score available for free rather than selling it commercially. Because what you really want is to get your music known and then performed live, and once it's being performed, then hopefully other opportunities will flow from that. Obviously, the key thing though, even if you do make a score available online, you do need to be really, really careful about protecting your copyright. And that's the next issue that we come to on the next slide. Absolutely crucial that any score you produce and make available either digitally or physically should state unequivocally, using the copyright symbol and your name and the date of the composition, that you own the copyright. Often, if you're selling scores, you will say that photocopying of the score is forbidden. Again, as a self-published composer, it's entirely up to you. If you take the view, well, if I'm making my scores available free of charge on my website as a promotional tool, actually I'm not too bothered if someone then who likes my music puts it on a photocopier and gives it to somebody else. It's up to you how you manage your copyright, but you should make very clear on your website the terms of use. You know, so you're saying to people, you can have terms that say, very happy for you to download this score, and I'm happy for you to share it, but absolutely no commercial use without my consent. And we can, the ISM legal team's happy to give you advice about detailed terms and conditions, because different composers will take a different view about those issues. But you have to be thinking about them, and at all stages thinking about doing what you can to protect the copyright, but in a way that doesn't doesn't create an obstacle for you promoting your work and getting as many opportunities as you can. It can be something of a balancing act.
Can I chip in briefly at this point here? I mean, one thing that's worth saying is if you're considering getting your music out there in an online format and a printed format, then the prices of the two should be very similar.
Yeah.
With the PDF version just a little bit cheaper than the printed version. However, if you're only putting PDFs out there, sometimes it's a good idea to put the price quite low. Some ways that's better than offering it for free, because people often think, well, if it's free, it can't be that good. But offering a price, which is just, £5 for a big score or something, or £3 for a short piece, makes an enormous difference, because people do then physically have to pay it, and they think they've got something for the payment, but it's not an unreasonable amount of money. Whereas £75 for a PDF is unreasonable. So there's that whole game to play too.
Yeah. Great. Next topic we wanted to cover was arranging music. This is something that was raised with me as I was preparing for the webinar. Often composers want to arrange music. The legal position is quite clear on this. You shouldn't, it is technically a breach of copyright to arrange any music which is already in copyright without the permission of the copyright owner. So under UK law, essentially music is in copyright unless the composer and the lyricist, if it's a song or there are words, unless they died before 1946. Anything else will be in copyright, and you ought to seek permission from the publisher before making an arrangement of that music. The Music Publishers Association helpfully offers to assist composers in locating the publishers of in-copyright music so that you can ask the right person for permission to arrange. Now, Steve, I know you've got considerable experience of arranging copyright works. You want to sort of add something on the practicalities of how you went about that?
Certainly. Well, the first thing is not to automatically assume that anyone who's been dead for 70 years is out of copyright, because there are some really important exceptions. George Gershwin is one, especially the songs, because the words were written by Ira Gershwin, who died much, much later. So in fact, when you have a lyricist, it's 70 years after the last one has died, as it were. A lot of people are caught out with that one. But essentially, if you want to make an arrangement of anything, you must ask the publisher. Now, sometimes the publishers aren't that interested, and they don't reply to you because they don't think you're an important person, or most of all, they don't think they're going to make much money from you. In other instances, if you're going through a big record company or a larger thing, then of course they're very happy to give you permission to use their piece. Of course, what they will do is they'll keep all the money. And what normally happens, and what's happened with me a couple of times when I've done arrangements of things in copyright, is the publisher will sign a deal with you and pay you the fee of £1 or $1 for your arrangement. You never physically receive the pound or dollar, it's just a sort of agreement on paper. And from that moment on, at all performances and all recordings, then the publisher who own the copyright take all the royalties as normal. And they're very happy to do that, obviously. So there's nothing wrong with making an arrangement of something, asking permission, and so on. The difficulty comes when you make any money out of someone else's copyright. That's the big problem. So one thing to really avoid is thinking, well, I'm going to make an arrangement of something, I'll just put it online and see what happens. As soon as you put it out there, it means anyone can do anything they like with it, and it will have your name on it. So one has to be very, very careful with arrangements. So I would always write to the publisher, and also write to the publisher a long time in advance of when you actually need the permission, because these things don't come overnight, and often they'll require second, third, fourth follow-up emails. If the publisher suddenly thinks, oh, we might make some money here, they're performing this piece at the Royal Albert Hall in this arrangement for 12 zithers and 1 double bass, then they'll sanction the recording to make sure they can pick up that money. So it's very much a sort of business-orientated sort of situation. The thing that you must be very careful of is not making recordings of stuff that's in copyright without permission. A friend of mine many years ago recorded a whole load of Poulenc arrangements and then asked for permission to make the arrangements retrospectively. They were denied, and all the CDs had to be pulped.
Yeah, when people get tripped up by copyright, the consequences can be very serious indeed. So that's another issue where we in the ISM legal team try and help our members avoid some of those pitfalls. Just moving on, a word about live performances. If you're a member of the PRS, by virtue of your membership, you've assigned what's called the performing right to PRS for music, which means all venues with a valid PRS license in place will be licensed to put on performances of your work. We strongly recommend that all composers join PRS, so that there's a one-off flat fee to join, and really you do need to be part of that licensing system. In terms of getting making sure those performances of your work are reported to PRS, that is primarily the venue's responsibility, but clearly you can and should contact PRS directly if you think performances of your work have not been reported. No one makes a fortune, or well, not unless you're extremely successful and having performances in very large major venues. It's rare to make a fortune from PRS royalties. But our advice always is that composers, even if you're right at the start of your career or just starting out trying to make money from your compositions, you should be part of the PRS system. You should be a member. You should try and understand how the royalty system works and try and get all the money you can. But you shouldn't expect to get vast sums via that route. Moving on to the issues of networking and marketing, and this is a really crucial issue. It's kind of impossible to sort of really emphasize enough how important it is. If you're going to be a successful self-published composer, you've got to be great at the networking and marketing side of the business. So we suggest develop a marketing plan for your work. Work out who is your target market, what kind of performers or ensembles or other industry figures are going to be interested in the particular kind of music that you're composing, and think about how you are going to go about promoting your work to those people. And there are three sort of really key factors I want to mention in relation to networking and marketing. The first is live performances. If you can develop a good relationship with performers and ensembles, which means you're getting a steady flow of live performances from your work, that's a fantastic way for you to promote yourself as a composer. You should be at all those live performances, meeting as many people as you can and using that as an opportunity to develop your network further. But really, really crucial, good relationships with performers can be really helpful for composers. And one of the things we like about the ISM is that our membership includes both composers and performers, so that can be a real boon to our composer members. Another factor is a good website. This is in the current environment, having a good professional website that presents you and your music in a really professional and positive light is really, really important, and you can't stress that enough. Finally, social media, the use of Facebook and Twitter. Again, this is the way people are increasingly communicating. When it's done well, it can be really effective, but you've got to make sure you're doing it regularly. You're using interesting, engaging material. Often photographs or short video clips are very useful, and you do need to be aware of the differences between Facebook and Twitter. People use them in different ways. They have different audiences. So slightly different strategy for those two platforms could be important. Now, Steve, I wanted to bring you in on this because I know you want to say something about the importance of live performance.
Yes, well, networking and marketing are absolutely crucial. I mean, as a composer, yes, you've got to have a good website. Yes, you've got to have performances of your work, but you have to be out there meeting people and socializing and networking, making sure you're at all the kind of major shows for your sort of music. You know, if you're writing choral music, you need to be at the ABCD conference. You know, if you're writing guitar music, you need to be at the Guitar Foundation of America conference, you just need to be around, and you need to have your stuff with you in a kind of slightly un-British, self-promoting kind of way. The composers who are often the most successful ones are the ones who just get on with people and are good friends, and you go for a beer. I mean, the number of times that sort of major deals have been struck in a bar late at night at one of these sort of events is extraordinary. And nothing replaces just sort of being there, because people make a connection with you as a person, first and foremost, and a composer only second, actually. People are never going to necessarily be completely wowed by your music on its own, but your music in combination with your presence and your personality, your interaction with them is crucially important. Building relationships with performers is the way to go, really. I mean, many of the most successful composers of the later part of the 20th century set up their own ensembles and toured playing their own music. Michael Nyman, Philip Glass, Steve Reich, the list is long. And in effect, when you've got control over the performances, you're working with performers who really are interested in your music, they will give great performances of it. And having great performances of your music live and also on video, again, is crucially important. David mentioned having a good website. That's great, but don't necessarily think of the website as something which is a marketing tool per se. It almost needs to be a resource. It needs to be where people can go to get information about you, rather than you advertising yourself to them. So they'll often know about you before they go to your website. It's not necessarily the first time they'll encounter you. So you want to sort of offer resources, and easy to find resources. So just with a couple of clicks, you can get the piece you want to find, a list of everything that you've done, some good videos of pieces, or whatever. So having a well-organized website that's easy to negotiate and get around and get what you want quickly and leave is really, really crucial. Onto Facebook and Twitter briefly. I mean, Facebook has become a huge sort of center of all things musical, and a lot of that musical activity is kind of recorded through Facebook. It's always good to have an artist's page as well as a sort of personal page. You can put some stuff to do about your work on your personal page, but if you've got a separate artist page that simply is about you and your work, that's fine. Otherwise, all your friends start getting a bit annoyed if all you do is post promotional stuff about yourself on your personal page. So keeping the two separate, I think, is quite important. I haven't quite learned that one myself, but I'm sure I will at some point. Twitter is a tricky one, and it takes much more expertise to use Twitter well. And generally speaking, Twitter is designed for fans to follow famous people. And so it's not quite the same as Facebook in trying to sort of establish yourself as a figure. So it's worth really thinking about that. And there are people who are great experts in these things. You can just sit down with them for an hour and they can just tell you what to do for your needs. And it's incredibly helpful, saves you thousands of hours.
We have for our own ISM members, we have a business development consultancy service. So all our members are entitled to an hour's advice over the telephone with a consultant. And I know one of the issues that consultant is sort of very helpful with our members is this issue of getting your website right, getting your use of Facebook and Twitter right. So there are resources out there to help you, but you do need to be thinking about these issues. And I just want to pick up one point that Steve mentioned in terms of the good website. I think what you were saying is it's really the resources that can be accessed via the website.
Absolutely.
And presumably that is high quality scores,
yep,
some good attractive video clips of your work, and also sound recordings as well.
Yeah, absolutely, but to feed everything through your website, so that basically your website becomes the first port of call, even if then you're linked to your publisher or your self-publishing or to YouTube or to anywhere else. But it was as if the website is a conduit, and it is a sort of center for people to gather information so they can find things quickly and easily. Because the number of performers who spend hours and hours looking for obscure little pieces, trying to get hold of people and so on. When composers have a really efficient website, their music gets played more. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that's excellent advice.
And sorry, just one thing.
Sorry,
just one thing to add about that. I mean, self-publishing doesn't mean doing everything yourself. I think that's a very key thing, and that actually, paying people to do things for you piecemeal, either keeping someone one day a week or just paying the odd consultancy on something is crucially important. And with a website, it's making sure you go to a designer who's done this kind of thing before and a lot and can advise. Because sitting down with a blank piece of paper and designing a website is really difficult. And one thing to do is to just look at lots of other composer websites and rate them. Choose your top 10. Look at 100. It's well worth the time investing looking at how other people display their music. Some people's websites are brilliant. Graham Flitkin has a great website, for example. He self-publishes, and he's a major figure. But his stuff is very easy to find and negotiate.
Great, all very useful advice. Just one final issue I wanted to mention, but I think it fits in with the point Steve just made about on some, don't be afraid to ask for advice, and sometimes it's sensible to pay for advice on some of the issues you need to consider. And I think that does apply in particular to tax issues. I'm not an accountant. I don't present myself as a tax expert, so I'm not going to talk in detail on these subjects. There is some further advice in our pack. But basically, like all self-employed people, you do need to be aware of your tax issues. Really, really important to claim all your tax allowable expenses. If you're thinking about investing in equipment, we've talked about printers, we've talked about binder machines, all sorts of expenses you might incur in self-publishing. In terms of buying kit to help you with that, you might want to consider claiming a capital allowance. But the pros and cons of capital allowances are actually quite complicated, particularly if you then sell the equipment and buy something more modern. So you do need an accountant's advice to sort of guide you through that. And then there are VAT issues. No VAT chargeable on printed music, but it is chargeable on digital sales. I think what I want to say is seek expert advice on this. Through ISM, members can speak to accountants about these kind of issues for free through our helpline. So that's one useful source of advice. But obviously there are accountants out there who specialise in helping composers and musicians, and you're probably well advised to go to them to talk through some of these issues. Leading on from that, how the ISM can help. Our members are entitled to free advice on many of the issues that we've discussed in this presentation. You've got the legal team, which I head up. We have a business development advisor that I've referred to, business support officer who advises on business and tax issues. We've also got the accountants on our tax helpline. So we have resources that can help our members with these kind of issues, and you shouldn't hesitate to contact us. And that takes us to the last slide, which is get support, protection and advice you need as a working musician from the ISM. I hope that makes sense in the context of what I've just said. Good. I'm delighted to say that, as planned, we've left some time for some questions. So I'm going to try and answer these. Sorry, is that from the top? They're all there. Sorry. Actually, some of these are helpful suggestions, which is fantastic as well. So one of our attendees has said, ensure your parts include appropriate page turns. Well, that just goes back to Steve's point about how much time and effort you have to put into producing good professional scores that are usable for the musicians.
Oh yes, I mean it's also cues. The number of times cues will save an enormous amount of rehearsal time. And if music is complicated, anything that will help a musician know where they are in relation to the others, a rhythm line, just thinking of all these practical things to ease rehearsal, save rehearsal time. Obviously, obvious things like make sure all your scores have bar numbers, rehearsal letters, etc., etc. But absolutely crucial.
Yeah. Interesting questions come up about how much of what we've been saying is relevant to popular music as well. One of our attendees has recently released an EP, and they're saying, well, is it worth me producing sheet music for their songs? Well, presumably that's all about knowing your market. Steve, do you want to say a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. I mean, there's a difference between a market that will listen to your music and not play it, and a market that will play your music. And I suppose it depends who the EP is aimed at, and whether you think other people are actually going to play it. Sometimes it's well worth having sheet music just available for free, just simply because it will help the people who just want to listen, and they can follow the sheet music and see what the chords are and so on, and maybe take some of the licks and try them out themselves. It may be worth considering, publishing stuff in tablature, it's guitar-based stuff, or even producing sort of YouTube tutorials on how to play your own music. It's another way of doing it. But I wouldn't necessarily see it as a fertile income stream.
Great. Just going through some more of the questions. I'm trying to take them in the order they came in, to be fair to everybody. How do you sell your finished product in a real music shop when they refuse because you are not on their list? Well, again, I think that's the thing about knowing your market. I think that probably, if a music shop isn't interested in their music, well, then you've got to find a different music shop that is interested in your music, or performers, or have a fantastic website that's going to allow you to access the people who are interested.
I think one of the crucial things these days is that the music market is highly fragmented, and places are becoming more and more specialized. So it may well be that a composer will sell their vocal music through one distributor, their guitar music through another, their educational music through another. And it's not as if a shop is going to buy the complete works of X composer. It's a question of where they're going to do it. But I think, increasingly some of the larger online stores, music room and so on, will take anything that they know will sell. So it's really a question of, if you feel you've got a market out there and that you are selling a certain number of things, then these places will take them on. And the other thing is, if people do want to buy your music, direct them to these third-party places rather than to your website, because then that increases distribution. It depends if you'd like a presence in a kind of either a real music shop or a virtual music shop. Who's actually going to walk off the street and randomly choose your music if they don't know about you already? So much of this publishing is about building a following. And if you have a following, they'll know where to find you. So you're not necessarily going to get a serendipitous moment where someone walks into a music shop in Blackburn, Lancashire, and sees a score of your piece for tuba and piano, and suddenly they buy it. The market doesn't really work in that way. So, in a sense, it's being able to direct people who are interested in your stuff to places to make those places take the work on. Yeah, that makes any sense.
Yeah. Next question. I made an arrangement for a school choir of a song that is still in copyright for a local arts festival. I had to pay £100 and could only print one copy and had permission to perform the arrangement for 1 year. The school fortunately decided to pay the fee as their choir had already learnt the song. Is this normal? As according to you, it sounded quite different.
Steve, well, there is no normal.
Exactly, it is down to the individual publisher.
It is.
It sounds like you've got a rather greedy one there.
Well, the thing, I think, as I said before, publishing is a difficult business to be in. These are not people sitting down printing money. And a lot of them are almost living from hand to mouth. Even some of the ones we'd consider to be bigger. Everything is changing at the moment. And I think, if a publisher thinks, oh, they want to do my piece, therefore, in order for them to do it, they've got to pay this. They get the same with examples of music for musicological books. Some publishers charge enormous fees for them to print just a short extract, 8 bars. Others charge nothing. It is down to the individual publisher, and they're in the position, because they own the copyright, to charge what they want. So there's nothing much we can do, because they'll say, this is the price, and you say it's too much, and they say, well, you can't have it then.
Great, we've got loads of questions, which is fantastic. So we'll try and get through them all. Next question, what about educational music? But presumably that's again about tapping into your market. You need to know how you're going to access that particular world.
A good example, many years ago, some friends of mine set up a publishing company themselves, self-published, called Holly Music, to publish educational guitar music. And initially they just sold some stuff they printed at home to their pupils, and then their pupils left and they got pupils, and over a sort of long period of time it grew and grew and grew. And I think it's that, again, it's back to those sort of personal contacts. Also through other educational publishers like ISM and so on, and getting involved in those publishers, or approaching those publishers who specialize in educational music. But there's far more music to be had in educational publishing than there is in concert music publishing.
Yeah. The name of the author of Behind Bars, we've been asked to repeat that.
Elaine Gould.
Elaine Gould.
Elaine Gould. It's published by Faber. It's very expensive, but it's worth every penny.
Recommending a good music website designer. I think I will take that offline. We have partners at the ISM who can help with that and provide a discount for ISM members. But I'll approach that member directly just to sort of pursue that further.
I should chip in though and say that a cheap website is a false economy.
Good advice.
And you definitely want one that you can update yourself simply from any device. One of the things that is often a disaster with websites is that people don't update them enough. You know, you go to someone's website and it's announcing future concerts in 2013, and you think, oh, right, okay.
Next question, is ISM in any way in contact or associated with SOCAN or ASCAP, or is it a separate entity for people from all over the world? Now, ASCAP's obviously the equivalent of the PRS in the United States. SOCAN, I think, is the Canadian, the Canadian one. Basically, the position is that for UK-based musicians, you join PRS, and then PRS has a relationship.
They do, but
with the collecting societies overseas.
Well, my publisher is in Canada, and so what happens is you actually have to make the connection. You have to write to the PRS and say, these works are published by blah blah blah. Then they contact SOCAN and they make the connection. It doesn't happen automatically. You have to point them in that direction. But yes, they're all related. But you have to sometimes make the connections yourself.
Sometimes you need to give PRS a nudge. Is it worth considering online platforms like J.W. Pepper's self-publishing profiles, which you pay for? That's a useful question. There are a number of platforms that are now helping composers with self-publishing. J.W. Pepper has been mentioned in this question. Composers Edition, I know, as a corporate member of the ISM, and actually helped us put the self-publishing pack together. So that's certainly something that you can consider and perhaps make the sort of beginning with self-publishing a bit less daunting. I don't know what your experience of those platforms is, Steve.
Well, Publishers Edition is great, but I think, you know, again, the thing to do is to just start Googling composers' names and seeing what sites are like. You know, literally, if you spend 3 or 4 hours just looking at composers' websites, after that amount of time, you'll learn an enormous amount about what works, what doesn't work, what's intuitive, what's counterintuitive. And, you know, to start from having already done that rather than just immediately jumping into something.
Again, a request to repeat something. The name of the composer with the excellent website that everyone's going to have a look at.
That's a bit unfair, isn't it? This was Graham Fitkin, I mentioned. Wasn't going to try and mention people by name. There are others too. You know, I could mention all sorts of people. We should look at mine, obviously.
Yes, look around.
Will Todd is another one. He's a very interesting composer because he's published by Boosies and by Oxford University Press, but he's also self-published. But his company actually has employees, so he has a kind of completely, you know, all sorts of different things happening at once. You know, big major publishers producing the work, also his own publishing house where he has someone in to do marketing, someone in to do printing and so on. So, you know, there are all different scales. But I mean, I would just go and look for yourselves. Just think of any composer you've heard of and see what their website's like.
Next question, so someone who does music editions of 18th century music. They say that some of their editions, which clearly been marked with their copyright symbol, have been used in recording and performances without authorization. Is that legal? That sounds very much to me like a breach of copyright. So you should take, if you're concerned about those instances, you should take legal advice. If you're an ISM member, you should certainly contact the ISM legal team, and we will look into that for you. Moving on, I'm a traditional Scottish musician. If I was to publish someone else's tune with permission, how much should they be paid for this? Well, that's a, that's a matter for negotiating between you and them. All we can say is that undoubtedly, if they compose a tune, it belongs to them, it's their copyright, and you should not be doing anything with it without their permission. What they want, what they ask you to pay for that, or even if they ask you to pay for it at all, is entirely a matter for them, and you need to have a discussion with them about that. But the important thing is to respect the fact that they own the copyright. We've dealt with the website issue. Sorry, writing down a pop song is a good way to copyright. That sounds like an observation. Actually, you don't need to write it down. The moment it's captured in some tangible form, so an audio recording will establish copyright just as much as the written score. Do the copyright issues we're talking about change when the music is written at a student level? Do you still have to contact the copyright owner? Teachers are no doubt rewriting well-known songs for school bands all over the world without asking first. Is this still technically illegal?
I think one thing to say is that the illegal thing is making money from someone else's intellectual property.
There is, it's quite a complex area. One of the Copyright Licensing Authority, I think it is, the CLA, recently produced a school's music license, which many schools will have signed up to, that allows arrangements to be made for use in the classroom. But that's a specific exception, and you need to, and there are restrictions to that license. So if you're interested in that, you do need to consider the legalities very carefully.
Well, can I just chip in very quickly, because this is an important point, is that often if people are doing their course at a university or a music college and they're producing work as part of their course, the copyright of that work is actually owned by the institution. The institution, of course, can hand it over to the students when they graduate or whatever, but officially the university or the college or whatever own the copyright of any coursework. Just something to note.
Yeah, very important point. What do you do when you sign with publishing companies like Centric, who don't really do much? Is seeking a publishing deal the way forward, or self-publishing? Well, we've been trying to deal with that question for the last hour. It's a balancing act. Some publishers are great, some publishers are less good. Self-publishing can work very well for some composers, but you do need to bear in mind the challenges of self-publishing. There's no point doing it if you're not going to do it well. And we have tried to sort of deal with some of the issues for you to consider in the course of the hour. Can I get signed to a publishing company even when I have my own, maybe as a co-signing situation?
Well, I think one thing that's happening increasingly is that major publishers, are not taking composers on hook, line and sinker, lock, stock and barrel. They might cherry pick one or two pieces that they think are going to earn them some money. I've already mentioned a composer who has, some works published by one publishing company, some by another, some by his own publishing company. And I think that's increasingly going to become the norm. And that makes a lot of sense, really. Because I think, sometimes if there's a piece that has potentially got a very large reach, then a big company can take it on, can deal with all of that stuff. Something which might be a little bit more niche and might just have a few performances in different places could be taken on by the sort of self-publishing arm. So I don't think it's an all or nothing. I think the sort of portfolio approach to publishing is possibly the model that will emerge in the coming years.
Another question we've got is about identifying a good sync agent, in order to negotiate synchronization licenses. Are there any that are particularly sympathetic to self-publishers, or are there other routes into submitting material to the film industry without using a sync agent? That's a really tricky one, because obviously it is a very lucrative area for the composers who are lucky enough to get into the field. But certainly in my experience, it's a real challenge.
Yeah, I think having some kind of professional backup from a third party who is highly experienced is totally necessary. Going in on your own to negotiate you're going to come out with a less good deal for sure.
Yeah. I thought that aggregators took care of royalties when releasing an arrangement on an EP. I think once you've got aggregators involved, that might well be the case, because and obviously if you've got a commercially released recording, there are different factors involved which we haven't had the scope really to explore in today's session. So I think that's as far as I can take that, but if you want to approach me individually, I'd be happy to deal further. We're just going to try and deal with the last few questions in the 2 minutes we've got left. You've been great at giving us lots of questions. Is there any source of funding for composers that do not have a high income?
Are there composers that have a high income?
A tiny number of composers I understand have high incomes, but if you're constantly writing for Hollywood, you have a high income. But I'm afraid in general, composers struggle to make money out of composition. It's just the nature of the beast.
It is, and even people who are extremely well known, most composers will be earning money from doing other things, related things.
In terms of protecting copyright, particularly for large works, is it worth making a minimum purchase of 4 copies in order to cover at least 1 to a part for digital downloads? Something I've seen on music notes. I'm not sure that helps with, I mean, that's a commercial decision. It may well make sense for you commercially to have a sort of minimum number of copies that you order. I'm not sure that helps in terms of protecting copyright. The reason copyright is difficult to protect is photocopiers are ubiquitous. So, however, whatever you do, there is a possibility that someone will take the music over to a photocopier and then use it in a way that you don't like. So I don't think that there isn't a sort of magic wand solution to dealing with your copyright. The main thing is be aware of your rights and try and communicate as clearly as possible what people are or are not authorized to do with your copyright. Are there any courses on all of this stuff? I'm not sure. Maybe that's something we should look into.
Well, there are. I mean, certainly when people are studying composing commercial music or studying in various institutions, aspects of this music business thing do come into but they only tend to be integrated into full-time courses, as far as I'm aware. I don't know of any that are separate.
I've been asked, is there a way to sell online editions in such a way to protect the PDF files and prevent them being copied? There are, and this is actually mentioned in the pack, but the trouble is you're not going to prevent people printing the PDF, and the moment they printed the PDF, they can go and photocopy. So I'm really not convinced that it's worth investing a lot of time and effort.
Not really. I mean,
protecting the PDF.
And even then, if it's super protected, people can take a screenshot or anything. I mean, I think one thing that's increasingly becoming the case is that copyright works are appearing on websites like Scribed, like lots of different places, and suddenly, you find that your copyrighted work is up somewhere on some site in some country you've never been to and don't know anyone there, and people are happily downloading it for free from all over the world. So, it's a major problem. So I think any of these kind of sort of small steps we can take at that sort of level are not going to make much difference.
I'm going to very quickly wrap up the last few questions. An observation from one participant that they found printing on demand a far more profitable way to market their educational books than conventional publishing. That's a useful sort of response. A question about Sheet Music Pub Plus. Is that regarded as officially being published? Is that a form of online self-publishing? I'm actually not familiar with Sheet Music.
I've seen it. I don't know.
I think we'll have to take that question offline, I'm afraid. What would be a good choice for first-time self-publishing original compositions release to distribute through Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and the sort? So again, this is the issue about, well, you've got to decide which of your compositions is the most marketable, and that's the one you want to self-publish first, the one with a market. And without a longer discussion about what about those issues, we can't really advise further. But that's just the kind of thing our business development consultant might be able to help with. Thanks for the webinar. I'm glad it was useful. Finally, sending an email to yourself is that legal copyright. This, I think, goes back to a method that used to always be suggested to people as a way of protecting copyright, that they send their music to themselves through registered post. It is a bit crude, to be honest, and it never did create copyright. Under UK law, copyright exists the moment that the copyright work is either written down or recorded. The point about sending it to yourself was it could provide proof that it existed at a particular date, if that ever became an issue in future. If there was ever a dispute in future about when the work was created. I've always thought it was a bit crude. Sending an email to yourself might provide evidence in some circumstances, but it's certainly not something I'd advise as a kind of magic bullet for protecting your copyright. We are now well out of time. You've been kind enough to say thank you, a number of people, so I'm glad you've found the webinar useful. Enormously grateful to Steve for joining us today and sharing his experience and expertise with us. And as I say, lots of further help on this, both from the pack itself and from the ISM staff team and our partners. So thanks for your time. Goodbye.